My name is Meredith Fisher. At 33 years old, I had spent my career designing large-scale computer systems, the kind that managed 400 million transactions and data movements every single day across 9 states. I built the invisible bones that kept banks, hospitals, and shipping companies running. At work, people knew exactly what I was worth. At home, I was a family failure. That title didn't come from a quiet assumption or a look across the dinner table. It came out loud in public at my brother's wedding in front of 200 guests while he stood next to his new father-in-law, a man worth more money than most people will ever see in their lifetimes. My brother Liam said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mother smiled and added her favorite line, the one she'd been polishing and using for years. And my father, as usual, looked somewhere else. What none of them knew was that the man Liam was trying so hard to impress already knew who I was. And when he looked at me and went completely still, everything my family had built their pride on began to crack. Let me take you back to where it actually started. It was a Tuesday evening in March, 6 weeks before the wedding. I was sitting alone in my apartment in Charlotte, eating soup I had made a few days earlier when my phone buzzed. It was a Fisher family group chat, the same one I had been quietly removed from 3 weeks before without a single word of explanation. I only knew I had been kicked out because the little red notification badge on my phone simply disappeared one day. No message, no reason. Just gone. Now they'd added me back. Not to apologize. Not to check on me. My brother Liam's message was short and blunt. Asterisk, are you coming to the wedding or not? Do not make things weird. Asterisk right below it, my mother typed that Sienna's family needed an accurate head count for dinner. Sienna was the woman Liam was marrying. Her father was Gerald Calloway, a man whose name I knew well before any of this began. Gerald ran a firm that had invested in 14 technology companies over the past 3 years, and every single one of them relied on infrastructure built by people like me. His companies actually used systems I had helped design at my job at Halcyon Systems. At the time, I didn't think much about that connection. I was too busy reading the message my father had sent, one short line. It would mean a lot to me, mere that was more than my father had written to me in 2 years. I put my phone down and looked at my cold soup. You have to understand how my family operated. There was one success story, and it was never me. Liam had dropped out of business school, started a company called Viridia, raised $11 million in outside funding, and was being written about in magazines before he turned 30. My mother spoke about his achievements the way a museum guide leads tours, with reverence, with performance, with a clear suggestion that everything else in the room was just a backdrop. I remembered a dinner the previous January. Our neighbors, the Pattersons, a kind retired couple, were over. Mrs. Patterson asked me what I did. Before I could open my mouth, my mother waved her hand and said I just did things with computers, like lists of information or something. Then she smiled at the neighbor and said, "We don't really brag about her." She said it lightly, like it was simply a fact of nature. The neighbor looked uncomfortable. My father studied his plate. Liam, who had arrived in a car he was financing well beyond his means, leaned back and smiled. The rest of that evening was a guided tour of Liam's accomplishments. Nobody mentioned that my parents had quietly pulled $140,000 from their retirement savings to bail Liam out when his company ran dry. My father had told me in a hushed phone call, the kind you make when you need someone to know the truth, but you're too ashamed to say it at full volume. They had given him everything. 30 years of my mother's work at a dentist's office and my father's years as a school principal, all of it poured into a company my brother had nearly destroyed before I quietly saved it. That was 4 years before the wedding. Liam had called me late one night, his voice cracking, admitting he had lied to his investors. He had told them he had a working proprietary engine. He didn't. He had a beautiful slide deck and nothing behind it. He begged me to help, because he was my brother, and because my parents insisted he was under enormous pressure. I agreed. I spent 3 weeks building him a real, functioning model, late nights, cold meals, doing work that I would normally be paid handsomely for. We signed a document saying he would pay me $10,000 and list me as a contributor. I received $1,500. My name appeared nowhere. When I found his company website months later describing the engine he had supposedly built, I recognized my own work the way you recognize your handwriting on an old letter. He had changed the colors and renamed the variables, but the logic, the structure, the architecture, it was all mine. I didn't say anything. I knew how it would go. My mother would say I was jealous. My father would look at his hands. So I put the signed agreement, the emails, and my documentation into a blue folder, slid it into my desk drawer, and went back to my life. I keep records of everything I build. It's just how I am, the same way some people keep diaries. I don't do it out of suspicion. I do it because my work matters to me, and I like having things backed up 2 weeks after message about the wedding. I drove to my parent house under the cover of dropping off air filters my father had asked about. Mostly I went because that short text from him made me want to believe family still meant something. The house was the same as always. Same flowery couch. Same lamp. But on the shelf above the fireplace there was now a glass trophy, Rising Founder, sitting next to a photo of Liam shaking hands with someone important. There were no photos of me anywhere on that shelf. Liam was in the kitchen eating a sandwich our mother had made for him, crusts removed. He looked at me and said every family needs one winner, and one person to show what not to do. Our mother laughed. My father looked at his hands. I put the filters on the counter. On my way out, Liam stopped me. He told me I needed to come to the wedding because Gerald Calloway was old-fashioned and expected to see the whole family present. He told me to show up, act normal, and please not talk about my work. He wanted me to leave my entire life outside the door, like a pair of muddy shoes. 10 days before the wedding, he sent me a private message asking me to look over some business documents. A family favor. He called it the same phrase he had used 4 years ago when he was about to collapse. I looked at the papers. They were full of fabricated numbers, making the company appear 3 times larger than it actually was. He was also quietly incorporating language from a set of technical standards I had published at Halcyon 2 years earlier, work that had my name on it in every industry database that mattered. He was planning to hand these documents to Gerald Calloway and ask him for a significant investment. I didn't reply to him. That same Monday morning, my boss mentioned that Gerald Calloway's firm had just signed a new licensing deal with Halcyon. She said Gerald had described our system as the finest infrastructure he had encountered in 20 years. And she looked at me when she said it, because I was the one who had designed it. I sat very still at my desk for a moment. Gerald Calloway knew my work. He had been using it across his portfolio for years. And now he was about to give a large sum of money to my brother for a system that was, at its core, a stripped-down version of the same thing, built by me with my fingerprints all over the code. A few days later, a man named Devin Pratt messaged me through a professional networking site. He worked for Gerald. He said their technical team had been reviewing a prospective investment and noticed that the underlying code bore a strong resemblance to my published work. He asked if I had a few minutes to speak. My heart didn't race. I just felt ready. I looked at my blue folder. Everything was there. The agreement Liam had signed, the dates, the emails where he had begged me, the documentation showing my development process step by step. I hadn't kept it to use as a weapon. I kept it because it was my work, and my work deserved to be remembered. I told Devin I would speak with him on Thursday. The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding, held at a restaurant draped in vines. Liam was warm and effortlessly charming, and when he introduced me to people, he described me as the quiet one who never left her desk. He was building a particular picture of me in everyone's minds, someone so forgettable and small that if she ever said something contradictory, it could be safely dismissed. One man at the dinner recognized my name from a professional conference where I had spoken. He knew exactly who I was, entirely independent of anything to do with Liam. I noticed that, and I held it quietly. On the drive home, I understood Liam's plan completely. He needed me at the wedding to present a picture of wholesome family unity for Gerald, and he needed me to appear insignificant so that nobody would give weight to anything I might say. What he did not know was that Gerald's team had already found my name embedded in his code. The wedding itself was beautiful in that expensive, carefully arranged way. Everything looked as though it had been ordered from a catalog of perfection. I wore a simple navy dress. My mother had suggested I wear something that would help me blend in, and I had spent enough years blending in. The ceremony was lovely. Liam even managed to produce tears. My parents sat in the front, looking like people who had finally arrived somewhere they had always been trying to reach. At the reception, I had been seated at a table in the furthest corner of the room. Liam came by early to tell me to relax because nobody there cared about me. I told him he could introduce me, but he couldn't tell me what to say. He laughed it off. When Gerald Calloway walked into the reception, the atmosphere in the room shifted. He was the kind of man who doesn't perform warmth. He doesn't feel serious, observant. Someone who had built real things and knew the difference between substance and presentation. Liam moved toward him immediately, eager and attentive. A short while later, Liam spotted me near the bar and brought me over like he was presenting a prop. In front of Gerald, in front of his new wife's family, in front of 200 people, my brother laughed and said, "This is our family failure." My mother, right on cue, added that they didn't really brag about me. I didn't get upset. I didn't smile to make it easier for anyone. I stood straight and said nothing. Gerald Calloway looked at me. He went very still. Then he said, "Asterisk, so it is you. This is a surprise." Asterisk. My brother's smile stopped moving. Gerald said my name, my full name, and told the group around him that my infrastructure was running across 11 of his portfolio companies. I told him it was 12 now, since the new agreement had just been finalized. He looked at Liam. He looked back at me, and in the space of about 30 seconds, he understood exactly what had happened. Liam tried to recover. He said I was exaggerating, that I had only helped in a minor way. Gerald, calmly and without cruelty, asked Liam to walk him through how the system actually worked. The architecture, the core logic, the technical decisions underneath it. Liam couldn't do it. He didn't know. He had never known, because he hadn't built it. My mother tried to intervene, saying this was a wedding and not the appropriate moment. My father, quietly and surprisingly, told her to let it continue. Gerald asked me directly whether I had built what Liam's company was selling as its proprietary technology. I told him yes. I told him I had built it 4 years ago, that Liam had not paid me what we agreed, and that I held documentation of the arrangement. I wasn't performing anger. I was just stating what was true. Liam's composure broke. He started shouting, accusing me of trying to destroy him, because I was envious of everything he had built, everything he had become. He reached for the glass trophy, the Rising Founder Award, possibly to hold it up as proof of something, but his hands were shaking and he dropped it. It shattered across the floor. The room went completely silent. The word founder lay there among the pieces. My mother made one last attempt. She told Gerald that I was a difficult person who didn't understand the business world. Gerald told her, carefully and clearly, that in the professional world he occupied, I was one of the most respected people he had encountered in this field, that my work was more valuable than anything else he had come across. My mother's expression changed. She had spent decades telling a story, and she could see it coming apart in front of her in real time. My father asked me quietly, away from the noise, whether their retirement money was gone. I told him I didn't know. He looked so much older in that moment than I had ever seen him look. My mother told me I should have stayed quiet, that I owed them my silence. I walked outside into the cool air and didn't respond. Gerald followed me out a few minutes later. He said he was sorry for not having made the connection sooner, and that the decision about Liam's company had actually already been made. His technical team had flagged the irregularities in the code before the wedding even happened. He said my work speaks for itself, and that had always been true. Over the following days, Liam's company unraveled. Investment conversations collapsed. His wife went back to her family's home. My parents reached out. My father asking carefully if I was all right. My mother saying only that I should have handled things differently. I told them both that I was willing to have a relationship with them, but only one built on actual respect. That was the boundary I drew, quietly and without drama. I went back to work on Monday. My systems were running without a single error. I confirmed my place on the speaker list for the Atlanta conference. I finally stopped saying no to being seen. For 10 years, I had been building things that held up the world my family thought Liam was conquering. The failure was never me. It was a family so committed to one version of success that they couldn't recognize the real thing when it was sitting across the dinner table from them, eating cold soup alone on a Tuesday night. Your worth doesn't require anyone's applause to be real. It keeps going, steady and quiet, like a heartbeat, whether or not anyone in the room is listening for it.